Indian journalist and activist shot dead 4 years ago, with no one yet tried for her murder. She was a high profile journalist and activist who spoke out against the rise of the right wing Hindu extremism. She was brave, she was independent, and that was her kind of journalism.
And I fear that, like Uttar Pradesh, Congress too will lose next year and will be started again with the communal, casteist, and corrupt BJP government. Thank you.
It is important to keep telling her story because she remains an inspiration for women, men, young people, transgenders, LGBTQ, Adivasis, indigenous people, Dalits, for all people because she stood for them. She became their voice in her life and in her death. She was Gauri Lankesh. Today we are speaking with Chidanand Rajgata, her good friend and biographer, about this very important lady in Indian history. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
So tell me, what is the first thing that comes to your mind when you think about Gauri Lankesh?
I guess courage and compassion actually together. She was an incredibly courageous woman. She was small built and she looked frail, but she was incredibly strong. And whenever I think of her, I always recall how strong she was, even going back to our college days. She reminds me in many ways of Sudha Bharadwaj, who's been in the news lately. She could have had the best of life, very comfortable life. She could have, reached, highs in English journalism. She could have gone abroad like many people do. They sort of decamp or dissociate from India. But she chose to stay and she chose to fight, and she picked really good, noble fights. So I always feel that she was immensely courageous, both physically and mentally. And also she had a very compassionate streak in her, going back to, again, our childhood, our youth, very caring. She was kind. She radiated kindness. And yeah, those are the memories. Those are the words that come easily to mind.
But like you said, it's like, a lot of people would have fled, but she chose to fight. Why is she such a big inspiration, especially an inspiration for women, for young people, for LGBTQ? I mean, you name it, and she has really touched a lot of hearts.
Right, because, she picked fights which few people do. Journalism in many ways is in a crisis because a lot of it has moved on to social media where everybody is yelling and screaming, and she stayed rooted to the ground. She stayed close to the ground, close to her roots actually. As you know, and I've described this in my book Liberal India, she started off as an English journalist, and she moved to Delhi with me in the 80s, and we were together till late 80s, and then she stayed on and she came back to Delhi for a while. She also worked in television, and she could have been one of these glamorous TV journalists or English media
She chose to
journalists.
actually write in her local language also, quite
Right. She actually went back to write in Kannada, which is her and my mother tongue. And went back to her roots to practice journalism from the ground up. And so there are very few people like that. And the fact is, journalists are under siege across the world, actually, because more and more governments are getting authoritarian, and many
policing.
policing, and also because in many ways authoritarian rulers have found that they can circumvent the media by going directly on social media themselves, like Donald Trump, what they call liberal media, or media that is uncomfortable to them and their interests. And so she stayed true to the profession, true to her roots, true to the ground, stayed close to the ground, or rather returned close to her ground. So she is an inspiration in many ways. And I think she is an inspiration for many journalists.
So, for people that may not know, and without getting too political, why was her journalism so controversial and she was often branded as an evildoer? Because what made it? Because she was talking about Hinduism, about Hindutva. What made it so controversial?
The reason why she attracted so much attention or controversy was she really picked issues which were not populist. She actually cared for people in a very genuine way. And so that sat uncomfortably. For instance, LGBTQ rights. That's not a popular cause in India. I'm delighted, actually. I've seen half the movie yesterday, a Bollywood movie which deals with transgender.
Yes, Chandigarh
issues.
ki.
Right. Yeah. And this is all becoming I wouldn't say fashionable, but at least attracting attention now. But back in the days, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, when she picked these causes, there was nobody. There were very few people, battling these issues, environmental issues. She was majorly into it, and so yeah, I mean, people did not, it did not sit uncomfortably with many people. When it came to Hindutva, she was against, sort of the radical ideas of Hindutva, the otherization of people, for instance. I mean, culturally, she was Hindu, and she was proud to acknowledge that. And I've written in my book, I mean, I have 3 Ganesha idols, actually, that she presented to me on one of my India visits. They sit very nicely in my house. But she hated the fact that one religion otherizes another. And it doesn't, not necessarily Hindutva. She was against radical Islam too. She picked causes, which were dear to her heart, and she fought very courageously. She was not always right. She was not perfect, but hell, she was a really kind-hearted person.
There's a lot of concern now because it was September 2017. It's been 4 years, the trial. Why is it taking so long? Because, of course, people were up in arms, but now people have forgotten. So there's also not that momentum. So that's why we also wanted to take this up, that why is this taking so long?
Frankly, I have no idea. I have not followed the case on a day-to-day or week-to-week basis, but that's India. I mean, that's our justice system. It takes, I mean, how long did it take for Sudha Bharadwaj to get bail? Our system moves really slowly. It is corrupt in many ways, and public memory is short. That's the fact. People move on. It's amazing. I was in India. Actually, I returned to India after she was assassinated, and I went for her memorial. And it was incredible, the amount of public outpouring. I mean, she would have been surprised, and I wrote that as much because in her lifetime, she didn't think she was kind of a celebrity or anything. She was really down to earth. And there was incredible outpouring, and as it usually happens, things sort of peter out or fade away. Public memory is short. People have moved on. There are other causes, other issues. But what she fought for, yeah, I'm glad, and I thank you for remembering it and trying to jog public memory. What she stood for was very important, is very important.
Just coming back to what you said, because this is very important, and her history also is very important because of journalism, freedom of speech, and just the terror in which I think journalists overall live with. Can you shed some light on that so that people really understand? Because I think when we look at it from the outside, we don't really realize that it's a scary world for them also.
Yes, it is. And like I said, she was immensely courageous. And I have to say this, I mean, I don't want to sort of genderize this whole issue, but, women journalists have a particularly hard time. It's really brutal out there. If you see social media and if you see the kind of attacks on female journalists, on women journalists, it is just, it is incredible, the kind of viciousness and toxicity on part of people who are very safely behind some anonymous handle on Twitter. So yeah, she was out there. She was not intimidated. She was a profile in courage when it came to journalism. And I think she serves as an example of not being intimidated. And I'm glad that in India right now we have a lot of women journalists. It's another matter whether you agree with them or not. I mean, they're, women journalists, I don't particularly agree with what they write or what they broadcast or their blogs or vlogs. But, give them the right to say their piece as long as it's not leading to, death and destruction. So yeah, I mean, I think it's important that we recognize that she was courageous and she stood for mostly for good things.
And what's your last closing thought that you'd like to leave the audience with?
I mean, I just wish, she is recognized more. I wish more journalists and more young people take up a career path in writing and public activism. Journalism is not really now, reporting something. I think journalists have to be a little more than that. And I know that the old school journalism is all about being objective and dispassionate and so on. That's how we grew up. That was my generation. But increasingly now, you have to be activist. You have to stand up for the right thing. And I think she serves as a wonderful example. I wish more people, like I said, at the memorial, there were an incredible number of young people from all over India who congregated for her memorial in Central College, Bangalore, where we actually studied. And I hope that her example, tragic though as the ending was, will inspire more people to take up journalism, writing, activism in pursuit of good causes.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you very much, Apirti.